My name is Simon S. Pava. This tape is dictated on December 9th, 1974 in West Hartford, Connecticut. When did you become Rabbi Eugene Lippman's assistant? Did you work with any other Jewish chaplains before or after this assignment? If so, please tell about these experiences at the appropriate point. What was your rank? I was assigned to work with Rabbi or Chaplain Lippman in August of 1945. At that time, we were both stationed with the 4th Armored Division in Germany. Rabbi Lippman's title was that of Jewish chaplain for the 4th Armored Division. Prior to working with Chaplain Lippman, I had served as an assistant to Rabbi Isaac Klein, Klein, while stationed at Mitchell Field in Long Island. And after Rabbi Klein was sent to Europe, I later served under Rabbi Milton Aaron, Aron, while still being at Mitchell Field. I had initially entered active military service on 1 June 1943. After some basic training, I did move to Mitchell Field in New York and worked with Rabbis Klein and Aaron and remained with them until being transferred to a different service shortly before being sent to Europe on 8 April 1945. My assignment while stationed in the United States as the chaplain's assistant involved the usual functions of this job, which included assisting and participating in religious services, making arrangements for services, making hospital visits, doing clerical work, driving the chaplain, doing correspondence work for the chaplain's office, etc., period. While in the States, I had the rank of corporal, period. Question number 2, describe your first encounter with the survivors of the Holocaust. What did they want from you, both the chaplain and yourself, and what did you do, period. Please be specific. It is impossible to recall an initial encounter. However, in general, the following is submitted, period. In the area of Germany where we were assigned, there were many displaced persons, period. It was readily observable that these people were in need of nearly any and every service that one could conceive of, period. At that time, it seemed to me that they had no, quote, sponsors, end quote, there were no governmental agencies yet available to them, period. Our main interest and concern was to try and provide whatever basic type of service we might to alleviate their many problems, period. period. More specifically, these included trying to arrange for clothing, comma, shelter, comma, effective communication, comma, and a sense of there being some hope for them. In order to try and explain some of our activities at this point, comma, I will read from a portion of a letter that was sent in my behalf describing some of the work that was attempted with displaced persons, period. This letter was sent in submission of my name for an award from the Army for meritorious service. I am now quoting. Technician for Pava's most outstanding service has been in the field of displaced persons activity. Circumstances forced the Jewish chaplain to assume responsibility for more than 6,000 Jewish displaced persons in the large area now occupied by the 4th Armored Division, period. Hundreds of requests from all over the world for the tracing of surviving relatives have been handled. Physical relief activity has been necessary, period. In addition to his assigned duties and on his own time, comma, Technician 4 Pava has undertaken much of the work in all these areas, period. His devotion to duty has resulted in the reunion of many broken families and their ultimate repatriation, period. He has alleviated much physical suffering among displaced persons by voluntarily distributing relief supplies, period. He assisted in the organization of the campaign by which these supplies were donated from the United States, and has continued to accept the responsibility for all the correspondence and detailed activity in connection with it, period. He has served the spiritual needs of displaced persons through the collection and distribution of religious supplies, comma, assistance in reestablishing and rededicating synagogues, comma, planning and organizing religious schools and classes, period. That's the end of this quotation. The next question is, describe in as much detail as possible your involvement with Aliyah Bet. I was not directly and specifically involved in this. Next question, how and when did you get the title Shimon HaTzadik? As in answering other questions and in recalling events that occurred nearly 30 years ago, much of what is herein recorded is hazy, and it should be seen in that light. However, it is my recollection that the Jewish community of Regensburg, Regensburg, had decided to write a history of the Jews of that period, and I was informed that in view of some of the efforts that I had made, I would be remembered and included in this history, and in that my name, my first name is Simon, comma, they would honor me by referring to me as Shimon HaTzadik. Next question is, describe any activities with the JDC that you and your chaplain may have had. How would you characterize this relationship from the beginning until you left? In this regard, comma, Chaplain Lippman had the majority of contacts with JDC, and the name of Joe Levine comes to mind as a person who was extremely dedicated and concerned and interested in working with DPs. I always felt that Joe had genuine and positive interests, and though, comma, as indicated above, comma, I did not initiate much activity in this area, but rather acted as an assistant, comma, in this area, I always did feel very warmly and positively of the role that the joint was beginning to play with the displaced persons. Next question, did you work with the Jewish Agency and UNRWA? Describe these experiences and your evaluation of their work. Here again, as in the previous question, comma, it was Chaplain Lippman who had the administrative and direct contact with the agencies. I did feel that they were beginning to take on the necessary roles that had to be played of formal agencies that got involved in the work, in that the work that both I and Chaplain Lippman were doing was work that was done, quote, on the side, and that there was a strong need to have people who had the specific function of taking the role of these displaced persons and helping them reestablish their lives and move on to new and more hopeful experiences. Evan, describe your efforts to smooth the relations between the DPs and the Army. My major interest in this regard was to interpret to Army personnel the totally impossible position that the displaced persons were in that even German soldiers and Polish soldiers had some degree of status as a result of being from a certain country and had some degree of interest from these countries and their personnel, comma, the Jewish DPs had initially had no one available to them. They had no status in the sense of being nationals of this country or that country. I tried to convey this total sense of aloneness to Army staff, and also to encourage their interest and their assistance in helping however possible. Next question, describe your work within the concentration camps or wherever you worked with Jewish survivors. I have tried to answer this in an earlier question. I would like to add that one of the most thrilling experiences that occurred to me during this awesome and awful period of Jewish history was when Chaplain Lippman performed the first marriage of persons from a concentration camp period. This did give us some sense of the continuity of life, even though we saw and were on the fringes of the suffering of so many millions, period. 9, what was the response of the Army to your activities? The Army's response, comma, essentially, comma, was a, quote, non-response, end quote. I had the feeling that some of the authorities were well aware of the fact that part of my time was spent on other than official army business, period. I was never harassed, however. I did have the feeling that certain sections of the military authorities felt more warmly than others about the activity that was being performed by certain Jewish personnel, period. I was fortunate enough not to be in a situation where there was any real degree of harassment, period. Next question is, were you involved in sending guns and money across Europe into Palestine? The answer to that is no. Next question is, how would you characterize the role of the chaplains during this period? I can speak only from the old memories, and my feelings are that some of the Jewish chaplains made enormous contributions in terms of time, effort, and zeal, period. I certainly felt Chaplain Lippman gave fantastic amounts of energy and put an enormous amount of effort into his work in this area, period. Another memory that comes back is that of the old, broken, and shelled Munich Museum, period. Perhaps you have heard of this previously, but one time while in Munich, I recall visiting the area wherein the museum was and finding on the broken walls the names of many Jewish survivors written on these walls in pen or in paint. As I recall, this was one of the first techniques that was used to provide some form of listing of those who had survived, and as people were in the area, they would come to the Deutsches Museum and see if they could find a familiar name scribbled on the wall, period. They, in turn, would, quote, register, end quote, by writing their names on these broken walls, period. I can still recall the stark screams of joy when and the weeping when one person might find the name of a beloved one written on the wall, period. I never did know for sure who started this project, but I believe that it was a chaplain who did, from these walls, begin to prepare a list of the initial survivors, period. Next question. What do you think might have happened had they not been there from the beginning? Was there any time that they were not really needed and could have been replaced? This, of course, is impossible to answer from the point of view of what might have happened had they not been there from beginning. One can only surmise that the life situation would have simply continued to be as catastrophic as it had been prior to their arrival, period. Prior to the entry on the scene of the Joint and UNRWA, it seemed to me that the Jewish chaplaincy did perform an heroic job. And a real part of this was the psychological reality of Jews from the camps finding soldiers who were interested in them rather than soldiers who would be interested in killing them. And also soldiers from America, the land of milk and honey, period. The knowledge that there was available contact with these people, and that the great and powerful American army included persons who were interested in them, must initially have been a shocking but heart-lifting experience for them. Next question. Is there any area that I have not touched upon that you feel should be given greater consideration? Reliving this period and rethinking some experiences that occurred nearly 30 years ago is both pleasant and very sad, period. Whatever has been said here, however, has been reported with as much objectivity as possible. However, as indicated above, it has been a long time, and it is difficult to be accurate after so many years, period. However, in summary, it has been my feeling that the lives and the destinies of many of the remnants of the European Jews and the Eastern Jews was made slightly more tolerable by the efforts of some of the Jews in the American military, period. Some of us were there right after the war ended and before it was possible for the large private and governmental agencies to, quote, get going, period, end quote. We did try to fill in as totally as we knew how though we did realize that our efforts were so fragmentary and minute in terms of the totality of the jobs that had to be done, period. It was therefore with great relief and satisfaction that we noted the arrival on the scene of UNRWA and personnel from Joint who could more formally assist in the job that had to be done.